I can name a worse situation than this.
They brought her out and she looked like a zombie. There was a sort of wildness in her eyes.
15 years ago, the nation was shocked to hear about this case.
While the news and popular media is dominated by stories of men who have committed crimes that sent shockwaves throughout the world, the truth is that a more dangerous evil lurks behind the crimes committed by women. In today's video, I'll be shedding more light on the most dangerous female criminals, their crimes, and how they faced the law. Andrea Yates. Andrea Yates was born on July 3, 1964, as one of 5 children. As a teenager, Andrea suffered from bulimia and depression, and by the time she was 17, she spoke up about her suicidal thoughts to a friend. And that would be the beginning of one of the most horrific stories anyone could hear. Although she was sick, Andrea was a bright student who was the captain of her high school swim team and the class valedictorian. She later completed a 2-year nursing program at the University of Houston and became a registered nurse. In summer 1989, Andrea met Russell, Rusty Yates, a NASA engineer. Their love story bloomed, and the couple got married in April 1993. The couple loved children and openly announced that they would have as many babies as they could. To this effect, they purchased a 4-bedroom house in Friendswood, Texas, with the dream of filling the house with children. However, things changed shortly after the birth of their first child, Noah. Rusty accepted a job in Florida and caused the family to relocate. Andrea seemed like a normal mother and was doing everything right, but that state of normalcy was soon going to change. After the birth of their 3rd child, the family moved back to Houston, where they purchased a GMC motorhome. Everything was fine with the family until Andrea gave birth to her 4th child, and her depression returned. The first signal of the situation happened in June 1999. Rusty returned home to find his wife shaking and chewing her fingers. The next day, Andrea tried to commit suicide by overdosing on pills. She was hospitalized and placed on antidepressants, but the drugs seemed to help. She had another episode in which she begged Rusty to let her die while holding a knife to get neck. She was taken to the hospital where she was diagnosed with postpartum psychosis and treated with several medications. Andrea slowly got better and was released from the hospital. Rusty then moved the family into a small house to make sure that his wife was properly monitored. Andrea's psychiatrist had told the couple not to have any more children, as it would guarantee a return of her psychotic depression. However, the couple paid deaf ears to the psychiatrist's warning and conceived their 5th child about 2 months after Andrea was discharged from the hospital. She had to stop taking her medicine for the period of the pregnancy, but that was a grievous mistake. Andrea seemed to be doing fine without the drugs for a while until the death of her father in 2001 triggered her condition. She stopped feeding her baby, turned to cutting herself and reading the Bible. This led to another hospitalization, and this time she was treated by another doctor. By May 2001, Andrea had degenerated into a state of near catatonia. She filled the bathtub and planned to drown her children, but changed her mind against it. She was once again hospitalized and thought to be suicidal. Things took a dark turn for the Yates family in June 2001 when Andrea purposefully drowned her children. That day, Rusty left for work, leaving Andrea alone with the children, even though the doctors had advised that she should always be under supervision. Rusty's mother was supposed to arrive in an hour time to supervise Andrea and the children, but 1 hour was all Andrea needed to unleash the worst fate on all her children. One by one, Andrea took her children into the filled bathtub and drowned them, after which she then carried their lifeless body and laid them in her bed. Her eldest son tried to run when he saw what she was doing, but she caught him and drowned him like the others. When she was done drowning her 5 children, she called the police first, then called her husband and asked him to come home. After her arrest, Andrea told a psychiatrist that she believed killing her children before they became sinful would save them from going to hell. Andrea Yates immediately confessed to get crimes and became known as the woman who drowned her kids. She was convicted of capital murder and was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Griselda Blanco. Griselda Blanco, popularly known as the Black Widow or Cocaine Godmother, was Colombian drug lord who became famous despite being a woman in a male-populated industry. She was born in Cartagena but moved to Medellin with her mother when she was 3 years old. Moving to Medellin exposed her to a criminal lifestyle from a very young age. By the time she was 11 years old, she allegedly kidnapped a boy and asked for ransom money. When his parents refused to comply, she shot and killed the boy. As a teenager, she delved into various forms of petty crimes. At age 13, she had mastered the art of pickpocketing. She ran away from home by the age of 19 and had to find a means of survival. She soon resorted to prostitution to support herself financially. Griselda continued in this way of life until she met and got married to a small-time criminal who she had 3 children with. She and her family illegally moved into the United States in 1964 using fake passports. However, after a few years of marriage, Griselda divorced her husband. She soon got into a relationship with drug trafficker Alberto Bravo, and the two ultimately got married. Her marriage to Bravo became a stepping stone for her to become a famous drug lord. The couple based in New York and then began smuggling drugs into the United States. Griselda was a smart woman who developed a creative means of smuggling that was almost impossible to catch. She would wear lingerie filled with secret compartments and use it to smuggle the drugs. With this method, Griselda and her husband built a well-functioning system of smuggling. Griselda's run-in with the law began in April 1975, when she and 30 others were indicted on federal drug conspiracy charge. She quickly fled back to Colombia before she could be arrested. That same year, she discovered that her husband was stealing money from the business. The discovery led to a shootout between the couple, which led to the death of her husband. At this point, 2 of her husbands had been killed, and many people believed that she ordered the hit on her first husband. She soon became known as the Black Widow, after the death of her 3rd husband, who she reportedly killed later. Griselda moved to Miami in late 1970s, where she grew her cocaine business and gained the reputation of the godmother of cocaine. In a bid to eliminate all competition in the drug market, Griselda turned into a ruthless killer who led the city into a period of violence known as the Cocaine Cowboy Wars. During this period, Griselda reportedly invented a method for her gunmen to kill people and flee the scene quickly by using motorcycle. She ordered numerous hits on people, and her gunmen were very effective. Through brutality and violence, she became one of the world's wealthiest drug traffickers at the time. She was reportedly smuggling more than 3 tons of cocaine into the United States yearly and was making up to $80 million per month. She lived a lavish lifestyle and loved to host hedonistic parties where she could spend her ill-made money. As the years passed, she made a number of enemies who were after her life, which resulted in her moving to California in 1984. However, in February 1975, the cocaine godmother was arrested in her home and was charged with conspiring to manufacture, import, and distribute cocaine. She was found guilty of her crimes and sentenced to 15 years in prison, but being locked up was not enough to stop her. She continued to run her criminal empire from behind bars. Things took a different turn for Griselda during her sentence. The state of Florida charged her with 3 counts of first-degree murder. One of her hitmen, George Ayala, cut a deal with the prosecutors and agreed to testify against her. However, the case collapsed when Ayala was caught in a phone sex scandal with 2 women who worked at the attorney's office. At the end of the day, Griselda pleaded guilty to 3 counts of second-degree murder in 1998 and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. She was eventually released in 2004 and deported back to Colombia, where she retired from a life of crime and led a quiet life. In September 2012, the cocaine godmother was killed by an assassin as she and her daughter-in-law were exiting a butcher's shop in Medellin. The hitman was on a motorcycle and fired fatal shots at her. Nanny Doss. Nanny Doss became known as the Giggling Granny after she was found guilty for the murders of 11 people who were related to her. Nanny was born on November 4, 1905 in Blue Mountain, Alabama, as one of 5 children. Nanny grew up hating her father, who was controlling and abusive to his wife and children. He stopped his children from going to school and would rather force them to work on the family farm. When she was 9 years old, Nanny and her family took a train to southern Alabama to visit their relatives. During the trip, the train suddenly stopped, causing her to hit head on a metal bar on the seat in front of her. This resulted severe headaches, blackouts, and depression, which lasted for years. Growing up, Nanny's father restricted Gus' daughters from wearing makeup, attractive clothes, and didn't let them attend social events. He believed he was protecting them from being molested by men. However, Nanny got married at the age of 16 to her co-worker named Charlie Braggs. Her father approved of the marriage, even though the couple had only been dating for 4 months. Braggs was the only son to a single mother who continued living with him, even after he got married to Nanny. Braggs' mother was an attention seeker and gave Nanny a hard time. After bearing 4 children, Nanny developed a habit of drinking and smoking to relieve her stress, but they soon became an addiction. The marriage began to crumble as both partners were unhappy and suspected each other of infidelity. A sad tale of tragic deaths in the family began in 1927, when their 2 middle children suddenly died of suspected food poisoning. Shortly after the incident, Braggs took his firstborn and fled, leaving Nanny with their newborn. In summer 1928, Braggs returned with his first child home alongside another woman and her own child. Braggs and Nanny soon divorced, and Nanny got custody of the 2 children. Nanny met and married her second husband, Robert Franklin Harrelson, in 1929. Few months into the marriage, Nanny was shocked to find out that her husband was an alcoholic who had a criminal record for assault. Despite the discovery, Nanny remained married to Robert for 16 years. The marriage came to an end in 1945 after Robert raped her. She was infuriated by his actions and decided to end his life. The next day, she laced Robert's whiskey jar with rat poison, and by the evening he was dead. Nanny quickly moved in with her life and was soon in search of another husband. Nanny met her third husband, Arlie Lanning, in Lexington, North Carolina. The two had wild connection, and after 3 days of knowing each other, they got married. It turned out that Nanny had married another alcoholic infidel, but this marriage was much different from her last 2 marriages. This time around, Nanny was the one who often disappeared and stayed away for months. However, whenever she was at home, she would dot on her husband and be the perfect housewife. Lanning soon passed away from what Nanny claimed to be a heart failure. It had not become clear to the people that Nanny had begun a killing spree. Soon after Lanning's death, the couple's house got burnt. The house had been left to Lanning's sister, but Nanny got the insurance money shortly after Lanning's mother died in her sleep. Nanny quickly fled North Carolina and went to live with her bedridden sister, Dovie. Just like the others, Dovie died soon after Nanny arrived at her home. Nanny soon started searching for another husband. She joined a dating service where she met Richard L. Morton, and they got married in 1952. This time, Richard was not an alcoholic, but he loved women and was adulterous. In January 1953, Nanny struck again. She first poisoned Richard's mother, Louisa, who had come to live with the couple. 3 months later, she poisoned Richard. As usual, Nanny moved with her life and began the search for yet another husband. She got married to her 5th and final husband, Samuel Doss, in June 1953, barely weeks after her last husband's death. Few months into the marriage, Samuel fell mysteriously ill and was presenting flu-like symptoms. It was found that he was suffering from a severe digestive tract infection. He was treated and discharged, but a few days later he was dead. His sudden death raised the suspicions of his doctor, who ordered an autopsy. The autopsy revealed that he had ingested a huge amount of arsenic, and Nanny was immediately arrested. She had hurriedly killed her husband to collect the 2 life insurance policies she had taken out on him. Nanny confessed to killing 4 of her husbands, her mother, her sister, her grandson, and her mother-in-law. In March 1955, she pled guilty to the murder of Samuel Doss and was sentenced to life imprisonment. Nanny suffered from leukemia and died in 1965 in the hospital ward of the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. Amelia Dyer. Amelia Dyer was a baby serial killer who took advantage of her position as a nurse and baby farmer to kill more than 400 babies. In 1800s, baby farming was a normal practice in which single mothers could pay midwives and nurses to take care of their babies for them. The baby farmers would then place the babies in homes where they would be loved and cared for. Sometimes the mothers of the babies would come back for their children when they had become financially capable of taking care of them. However, in the case of Amelia Dyer, she began murdering the babies in order to pocket the money given to her instead of using it to care for the babies. Before her husband died, she had trained as a nurse under a midwife who taught her about baby farming. When she became a widow and needed to fend for herself and her newborn child, she decided to go into baby farming, but she took hers up a notch. She started by placing several adverts in local newspaper and promising a safe and loving home for the babies who would be placed in her care. She would then charge her customers a substantial one-time fee for her services. What these mothers didn't know was that their children were about to be murdered by Amelia. Like many serial killers, Amelia developed an effective way to kill the babies. She would overdose them using an opioid solution used to calm crying infants. Whenever the coroner confirmed the deaths, she would express false shock and grief about losing the babies at such a young age. After calling the coroner several times to report deaths of the babies, a doctor became suspicious of her and whether all the deaths were really accidental. In 1879, the doctor brought the matter up to the authorities, but Amelia was only sentenced to 6 months in a labor camp for neglecting the babies. Her punishment seemed too small to make her change. Once she got out of the labor camp, she went back to her usual routine. She continued to place adverts, collect more children, and kill them. The only difference now was that she had realized that calling the coroner's office to confirm the deaths was a mistake. She then found several methods of killing the babies to make sure they wouldn't be traced back to her. She would then wrap the bodies with cloths and drop them in the river or hide them at different locations around town. Amelia was a smart woman who was willing to continue her business without getting caught a second time. She was very vigilant to avoid the authorities. Whenever she felt like the government was closing in on her, she would check herself into an asylum by faking a mental breakdown. At some point, she tried to overdose herself with opioid to make her claims of having suicidal thoughts more believable. When she wasn't in a mental home, she would move from one town to another, changing her identity every time she moved. She continued this pattern for almost 30 years and is estimated to have killed over 400 children during this period. Amelia came to the end of her road in March 1896. She had dumped a body in a river, but the body was found by a bargeman. The man alerted the police, who noticed a name and address written on a paper with the wrapped body. The police traced the address, and it led them straight to Amelia's house. However, they had no evidence linking her to the crime, so they set a trap to catch her. A young woman was used by police to bait Amelia, who fell right into the trap. The police searched her home and discovered tons of incriminating evidence, including dressmaker's tape which was used in wrapping the babies, letters about adoption arrangements, advertisements, and letters from mothers who asking about the welfare of their children. They also discovered that Amelia was packing up to flee the town, but she had gotten to the end of her reign of terror. After a careful search of the area, the police found 6 bodies, all of which Amelia confessed to killing. During her trial, Amelia pled guilty to only one murder and tried to use insanity as a defense, curing her numerous stays in different asylums. However, the jury believed that her visits to asylums were all under false pretense. She was then sentenced to death. She was executed by hanging in June 1986. Aileen Wuornos. Aileen Wuornos, popularly known as the Damsel of Death, was a serial killer who murdered 7 men in the space of 1 year. Aileen's mother was underage when she gave birth to Aileen. She then dumped her baby with her grandparents and moved on with her life. Aileen had a rough childhood, which then shaped the course of her life. By the age of 11, she began to sell her body in exchange for food, drugs, and cigarettes. From a young age, Aileen used sexual transactions as her major means of survival and soon decided to make a career out of prostitution. However, she had an affinity for crimes and got arrested severally for different reasons, including robbery. From the time she was 14 till when she turned 22, Aileen had accumulated a long criminal record and had tried to commit suicide a number of times, but always failed. Working as a prostitute soon gave Aileen a reason to hate men, and soon she developed an unending thirst for their blood. Beginning in 1989, she committed a string of murders that would earn her the title Damsel in Distress, and by 1999, she had murdered 7 men between the ages of 40 and 65. At first, Aileen made it look like she had been the victim of these men whom she killed because they tried to rape her. It turned out that her first victim, Richard Mallory, was actually a convicted rapist who had served prison time. Wuornos killed Richard by firing several gunshots at him. She then dumped his body in the nearby woods before discarding his car. Ella went on to kill the other men, but she was not alone. She was assisted by her lover Turia Moore for some of the murders. She was eventually arrested after Moore cooperated with the authorities and found a way to make Aileen confess to the murders over phone calls. Through these phone calls, the authorities gathered enough evidence to arrest Aileen for her crimes. She was arrested in Florida and charged with the murder of 6 men. During her trial, Wuornos repeatedly stated that the men had raped her before she killed them in self-defense. It was later discovered that she has suffered from borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder, but those were not enough reason to exonerate her of the murders. Her defense tried its best to prove Aileen's claim that the men had raped her by bringing up the fact Richard Mallory was a rape convict. On the other hand, the prosecution believed that Aileen killed the men for financial gain. She was eventually sentenced to death 6 times for all the murders except one in February 1993. Aileen spent 12 years on death row before her execution. During this time, Aileen made several claims and accusations against prison matrons. She claimed that the matrons were fond of adding saliva, urine, and dirt to her food in order to frustrate her into committing suicide. After so many years of awaiting death, Aileen decided to grant interviews just a few weeks before she would be executed. She spoke about how she was being treated in prison and how she had been unfairly portrayed as a monster in the media. Aileen Wuornos was finally executed by lethal injection in October 2002. Although men are more prone to become criminals, some women have proved to be as lethal as men when they choose to be. These women have left their names in the sands of time as the worst criminals the world has ever known.